All right, so get this. Imagine you're scanning the bottom of the sea, and suddenly your sonar picks up this massive, perfectly circular object that looks like it crash-landed. I'm not talking about science fiction. This is a real discovery that kicked off a huge global mystery and basically turned the murky floor of the Baltic Sea into a modern-day X-file.
So the year is 2011, and a Swedish deep-sea exploration company, the Ocean X team, is out there looking for old shipwrecks. When bam, this bizarre image shows up on their sonar. We're talking 91 meters down, that's 300 feet, on the floor of the Baltic Sea. It was a structure so weird, so totally out of place, that it just defied any simple explanation.
And you know what happens next? The internet just went nuts. The resemblance to a certain famous spaceship was, you can't deny it. Redditors were immediately like, that's the Millennium Falcon, while others were just like, there's no way that's natural. Even the Discovery team themselves were completely baffled, saying, hey, it could be anything. A secret Cold War weapon, a full-blown UFO, and this is where the mystery really starts to get interesting.
So it wasn't just the shape. The details surrounding this thing just kept fueling all the wild theories. First off, it didn't just appear there. It looked like it had skidded to a stop, leaving this 300-meter-long track behind it on the seafloor, like a runway. And then there was the really weird part, the reported electronic interference. The team swore that as soon as their boat was directly over the object, their cameras, their satellite phone, everything electric just died. They'd move the boat 200 meters away and poof, it would all switch right back on. So, is this just a weird rock or something else entirely?
Okay, so with all this speculation running absolutely wild, science finally had to step in to get a more, down-to-earth explanation. The mission was pretty simple. Figure out if we were dealing with a rock or a rocket ship.
So eventually samples were taken from the object. They were sent over to Associate Professor Volker Bruckert, who's a geologist at Stockholm University. And his analysis, well, it didn't point to aliens or secret government projects. It pointed to a far more ancient and, frankly, a far more powerful force: glaciers. The leading scientific theory was that this thing was just a glacial deposit, basically a massive rock that got dropped by a melting ice sheet thousands and thousands of years ago.
And yep, the samples confirmed it. They were made of granite, gneiss, and sandstone. Pretty much the most common rocks you'd expect to find in a glacial basin. The only thing that was a little bit weird was a piece of volcanic basalt, but even that was probably just carried along for the ride by the ice. So the scientific verdict was in. It's a rock, a very, very interestingly shaped rock, but a rock nonetheless.
And you might be thinking, okay, cool, case closed. But this is where our whole story takes a really sharp turn. Because while the entire world was obsessing over what turned out to be a case of mistaken identity, a truly mind-blowing discovery was being made not far away. A story not about aliens from some distant star, but about ancient humans facing a total catastrophe right here on Earth.
So to find that story, we're going to stay in the Baltic Sea, but we're going to head over to the Danish island of Bornholm, because here, archaeologists uncovered something that genuinely rewrites what we thought we knew about the Stone Age, the Vassagard site.
See this number? 4,900. That's how all the artifacts they found there are, in years. We are talking nearly 5,000 years ago, deep in what's called the Neolithic period. This wasn't the age of empires or anything like that. This was a time when our ancestors were just starting to rely on farming to survive, when their entire lives were completely tied to the seasons and, most importantly, the sun.
What the archaeologists found here tells this incredible story of a society in crisis. They uncovered hundreds of these small engraved stones. A lot of them are called sunstones, and they have these patterns radiating out from the center, obviously meant to be the sun. And these weren't just decorations. Archaeologists believe they were ritual sacrifices. See, around 2900 BCE, a massive volcanic eruption plunged the whole northern hemisphere into a volcanic winter, blocking out the sun and causing crops to fail everywhere. These little stones were likely desperate offerings from a community trying to bring the sun back and save themselves from starvation.
The story of the sunstones is just amazing, and it highlights the incredible knowledge we can gain when we approach the past with care. But this brings us to a huge global challenge: the conflict between finding knowledge and finding treasure. It's a battle that's really defined by the UNESCO Convention on Underwater Cultural Heritage. The difference here is fundamental. An archaeologist's goal is knowledge. They use slow, super careful documentation because they know the real value is in the context, how all the objects relate to each other and the site. A treasure hunter's goal, on the other hand, is profit.
They use rapid recovery, just get the stuff out of the water as fast as possible to pull up whatever items are commercially valuable, and in the process, they destroy that priceless historical context.
Think about it. A shipwreck isn't just a ship. Over hundreds of years, it becomes this incredibly complex site. The way the structure collapses, the way the cargo scatters, it all tells a story about the ship's final moments and the environment it's in now. When a treasure hunter just yanks a cannon or a gold coin from the seabed without recording exactly where it was and how it was lying, a piece of that story is just erased forever. The object becomes just a thing, and its meaning is gone.
So because of this really destructive potential, the guiding principle for modern underwater archaeology has totally shifted. It's no longer just about recovery and putting things in a museum.
This whole idea is captured perfectly in this quote from the 2001 UNESCO Convention. It basically translates to, in situ preservation should be considered the first option. In situ preservation. It's a fancy term, but all it means is leaving artifacts where they are. That's right. The #1 priority now is to leave things on the seafloor. It sounds a little backward, right? Why would you leave history down there? Well, it turns out there are some very powerful reasons.
For one, the deep, cold, low-oxygen environment of the sea is often a better preservative than any museum could ever be. Leaving a site untouched also turns it into an underwater archive. We're essentially banking that story for future generations who are definitely going to have technology we can't even dream of to study it without ever touching it. It also allows for responsible tourism, like with underwater parks. And it just recognizes the practical reality that excavating and conserving every single thing we find is, well, it's just impossible.
And this is what that principle looks like in action. This isn't about grabbing treasure, it's about careful documentation and protection. See the grid system they're using for precise mapping? And that protective cage? That's all to make sure the site stays exactly as it is. This is science, not a salvage operation. It's about making sure the stories that are locked away in our oceans can be told for centuries to come.
So we end up right back where we started, with a mystery in the deep. The Baltic Sea anomaly might have been just a geological curiosity, but it led us to a much, much deeper truth. Our oceans are a museum of human history, full of stories waiting to be told. The only real question is, what kind of museum are we going to be? One of careful preservation and shared knowledge, or one of empty pedestals where priceless stories used to be? The choice, really, is ours.